Hi, Diane.
Hey Mitch, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm early. I'm shocked.
Well, you're only a minute early. There's Don and Anita. Well, the Hellers often are first, and they're not coming because Penny is sick.
Oh,
Hi, Danita.
Hi.
Got in with no
hi.
problem tonight.
Yeah, easy tonight. Last week was a challenge, but
Oh, you weren't alone.
yeah, that makes me feel better.
Maybe it's all those unidentified flying objects we're shooting down.
That's possible
You never
that we don't
know.
know what are.
Yeah, I think it's the Martians.
Did you on the news tonight? I just watched. They made a statement from the White House saying absolutely not.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I kind of have my heart set on that.
I know, huh?
it's not like they really know.
So that makes it a UFO because they don't know,
Right.
or at least they're not telling us. Seems odd that we had so many all at once.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we just found out about them and it's been going on. You don't
That might be
know
true. Yeah.
why people don't trust their government because you don't know.
No, you don't know.
Oops. Need to turn that off.
But you wonder when you go out and look at the night sky and you see all this brightness.
There, my wife is here. Got a message from Carol that she swore she would be here.
Edna's here too, but she doesn't get her picture shown.
There's Dale. Carol and Dave. There's Ellen. Hi, Dale.
Hi, good evening, all. It's a little chilly out there tonight.
It was a beautiful day though.
True. Yes, can't get over the weather. Just as long as the rains keep coming so that the reservoirs don't dry up.
Right. Yeah.
They're pretty full. Yeah. So how are you, Pastor Mary?
I am just fine.
You're
Took a,
looking great.
took a nice long walk today.
Oh, good.
Cut my hair. That's why I look great.
Aha. Looking good.
Hi, Ellen.
You too, Mitch. You're looking pretty good yourself. Yes, sir. Mary's
Thank
keeping
you.
you right where you belong.
Mary cuts my hair.
Oh, she does a great job. Yeah, good for her. I did my hubby and the boys growing up. They never knew. Boys didn't know who a barber was until they were over 18. I see Diane. Hello,
Hey
Donita.
Dale.
And
Helen.
Helen.
Hello.
Everybody is well, I hope.
Yes.
Good, good.
I was talking with someone who has taken over Joe Glover's cat,
Oh, yes.
and the cat has put on 5 pounds.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
And so the person was telling me that's the difference between feeding a cat the German way and feeding the cat the Italian way.
Yeah,
Not just cats.
good for that. I babysat Linda James Tiara
Yeah,
10 days, and she really made herself at home. I was very happy. She seemed to be, right at home. She just loved running from one side of my house to the other. Yeah.
and how is Linda James? Is she
Doing very well. She has proven negative to COVID at this point.
great? Okay.
Yeah. So a couple of days, and I had Linda James over and Shenandoah yesterday to get together. I called it what's the name of the movie? A Lady and the Tramp night. We had spaghetti. And we sat around and shot the breeze. We had a little vino with the meal, and then about 3:30, I took him home.
Oh, you didn't stay and watch the game.
Football. No. Used to years ago. I was very faithful about 20 years, and no more. No, I get too
It's just-
excited.
It's only one more football game and then it's NASCAR season, so I'm glad football's over.
There you go, Helen. Yeah.
Sunday is Daytona.
Uh-huh. And Helen must be exhausted from working yesterday.
Yes, I am. I have had several very busy days in a row.
Uh-huh.
Today was my last one, but tomorrow was laundry day, so I pack it up and go over to my son's house.
There you go.
But so, it's not horrible, but it's still a day out. If it wasn't for the cat, God knows how late I would have slept in this morning, but he was bouncing all over me.
Hello,
and
David.
Finally, around 8:30, he gave up
Uh-huh.
and decided to
Okay, I haven't
settle
seen you
in
yet.
beside me.
Can you hear me? I just want to say,
Hey, there's Mary,
Hello, Carol.
Carol, thank you.
hello, yes. I
Hey,
still
Carol.
I still don't know how to get my picture.
Oh, for Pete's sake, excuse
Okay.
me. I gotta go
Uh,
on mute a minute.
Okay. I'm trying the video, but I don't know how to do it. I have a okay. I have a little camera. I'm in two different places.
Yes, you are in
There's
places
two.
and you have an echo because of that. And so we won't be able to understand you. You can only be in one place.
How do I give it place? I want to get
You should be able to X out of one of them.
right. Oh, there's I don't know.
At the bottom, click on the leave on one of them. There should be two there.
Click on this.
There you go. Talk now. Thank you. Sounds like you're okay now, Carol.
Does it?
You're good now.
Oh, God. I'm still in two places.
I was wondering if down at the bottom where the leave shows up, isn't there something to be on video? Because I've got a choice to stop the video. Is that why we don't see your picture? Because your video was crossed out?
Okay, let's see. Okay, what about that? Oh. Hmm.
Oh. No,
Let's see this.
we're back to having two Carol screens.
What about this?
No, no, you've muted yourself, Carol.
I'm trying.
You only muted one of yourself.
Right. First no video. Now two audios.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hello, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, Carol's got two of herself and that's causing, I think, well, hey, Carol,
Yes,
did you mute one of yourselves?
I don't know. How.
Okay, I'm gonna mute one of you.
Okay, just a minute. What
Okay,
about that? No.
hello? Can you hear us, Carol?
Okay. I'm here.
Okay, you're here.
Phew.
Okay, and can you see us?
I see.
Okay, so you can see us, and David is on my phone until he resolves his computer issues.
Yeah.
So everybody say hi to David.
Hi, David.
David.
I did.
Hi. Hello.
Hey,
So
99% of people with it.
see, here's his phone. Let's see. Okay, so tonight, so the Hellers are joining us. Penny isn't feeling well. So I don't think there's nothing serious, don't worry. So tonight we're going to talk about the Sabbath. So we'll have two lessons on that. Tonight we'll talk about the Sabbath from the Jewish perspective. Now the Sabbath is an interesting commandment. It's actually right in the middle of the commandments. The Decalogue is, what they call the Ten Commandments, and it's actually the longest of the commandments, if you count by words, which somebody with more time on their hands than I have did. So it has 55 words in Hebrew and is situated between 67 words that come before it and 41 words that follow it, which are all the rest of the other commandments. So, and just at least from the version in Exodus, it is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger who's in your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So that's compared to the other commandments, that's pretty wordy. The other thing is, so it's interesting, at least I was noticing, and we'll talk about some of it next week with the New Testament, but in the New Testament, it does, the Gospels do talk a great deal, not a great deal, but that's where you find some of Jesus' sayings about the Sabbath. Hello, Kat.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
So,
What a cutie.
He is.
interestingly, Paul, I was talking with, it occurred to me this morning, I was talking with Mary about it, that Paul doesn't really dwell on the Sabbath very much.
Fighting.
So now Paul dwells more on circumcision, where Jesus doesn't really mention anything about circumcision. So it's surely there's some reason for that, but it's something to think about. So basically the commandment says you should do no work on the Sabbath, but and as Cohen is going to discuss, he will talk about the fact that leaves a whole lot of questions open, like what is work? And then you get into the question, well, are there exemptions? And, there are some things which count as work, some things that don't.
Okay.
So those are some of the
You're not
things
being a
that
good boy.
we'll think about. Well, Cohen's talking now. I did send out, he will talk about an article that I sent out, but what he says pretty much covers what the article says, but if you're interested, you can read that. The other one is for next week, if you want to read that. Again, it's not critical. I did send you also Luther's view on this, and we'll get into that in a minute. But so Luther addressed the Sabbath in the Small Catechism, which some of you may have memorized. So anyways, are there any questions? Okay.
I did not have a chance to read, so
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. Well, that's okay. You'll catch on pretty quick. So I'm going to mute you all here.
I'll mute my phone, not Mitch.
Okay. Okay, next thing is I'm going to share the screen. Share sound. Oh, there it is.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good, they are educable. Good. Okay, so today we're discussing the third of our series of the big three rituals, which characterize Judaism or characterize ritually observant Jewish life, and all of which have been rejected, supplanted, replaced, transformed, modified, reinterpreted, whatever verb you like, right, by earliest Christianity and then from Christianity of ancient times to this day. There was circumcision, food laws, and today we're looking at Sabbath, or the seventh day. After this, we'll be looking at Passover, Easter, a central ritual for both Judaism and Christianity, and then we'll move on to theology, to theological points, truth claims. That's where we're going in the course. Okay, so today we're talking about the Sabbath, or the seventh day, what we call in English Saturday. What does Saturday mean? Yes?
Saturn's Day?
Yes, Saturday is the day of Saturn. So you know right away that the names of the days of the week that we use in English, in fact, reflect old astrological ideas, where each day, each of the 7 days, is under the influence of one of the 7 planetary spheres. The ancients knew about 5 planets, right? Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. 5 planets plus the sun and the moon. So you have sun, day, moon, day. All right, then you got Tuesday with this funny Norse stuff. Wednesday is more funny Norse stuff. Okay, but our English names are a mixture of things, but the names still show, and that's what we call in the biz an astrological week. The idea that there are 7 days, each day is under the influence of a certain planetary sphere. There's endless discussion whether the Hebrew Bible, with its notion of Sabbath rest every 7th day, has anything to do with this astrological week of 7 days as calculated by astrologers. The answer is probably not, but the question is very complicated and messy, and for our purposes, I'm not going to worry about it, because it doesn't really affect us. The key point is, if you like your weekend, you should be grateful to the Torah. Because the astrological week never produced the pattern of life which emerges from the Torah, with its every 7th day is a holiday, every 7th day is a holy day, every 7th day is a day of rest. That never came out of the astrological week. That comes only out of the Torah. And then Christians, of course, modify it and give us Sunday. And then gradually, in the 19th century, we get a 5-day. Okay, now we digress. Okay, but it comes out of the Torah. So, let's talk about the Torah. The Hebrew word, of course, is Sabbath, which I didn't write down, but you understand the word Sabbath. What does the word Sabbath mean?
They're whispering it.
Whispering it. What's Sabbath? Somebody don't whisper. Somebody say something. Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, Shabbat, Vayishbot, which apparently means to cease or to cease labor. So Sabbath might be literally translated rest or cessation from labor, something like that. Did somebody whisper that? So why don't you say it out loud? You got a gold star if you said it out loud. But if you whisper it, I can't give you a gold star. Okay, so circumcision is basically one chapter in the Bible, Genesis 17. That's the big chapter plus some scattered references. And large tracts in the Bible go on and never mention circumcision. The food laws. Food laws is one big chapter, Leviticus 11. And then we got a couple of other little things here and there, Deuteronomy 14, and some other references here and there. The Sabbath, in contrast, you have everywhere. There are references scattered throughout the entire Hebrew Bible, virtually, from one end to the other, about the Sabbath. Don't know exactly why this is so, but it is so. Now, the number of passages involved is much greater, much larger, and apparently the ancient Israelites themselves attributed much significance to the Sabbath in a way that food laws and circumcision perhaps only emerged later on as ritually significant markers. Okay, what do we see in these passages? I gave you a bunch of them on your syllabus. It's built into the nature of the cosmos, right? God creates the world in 6 days, Genesis chapter 1. What that actually means is not our worry at the moment. God creates the world in 6 days. Then on the 7th day, God rested. In other words, according to that narrator, according to that philosopher, right, the Sabbath is part and parcel of the cosmic order. It doesn't say in Genesis chapter 2, the first few verses, doesn't say God commanded you to rest on the Sabbath also, but surely that's implied. Surely that's meant. God rested on the Sabbath day and made it holy, understanding, well, that's why we Israelites do the same thing. We also rest on the seventh day and make it holy. But this is also a pre-Sinaitic commandment. Or actually, I agree, it's not actually a commandment, it's implied. Okay, so this is one of the main contrasts in the two versions of the Decalogue. What does Decalogue mean? 10 Commandments. Okay, what are the 10 Commandments? I'm asking you to list the 10 Commandments. I'm asking you to tell me what on earth is the 10 Commandments? I know, it's a movie, 1956, Cecil B. DeMille. Cast of thousands, Charlton Heston. Yes, I know that. What else is it?
They're found at multiple places in the Bible. Twice
Yeah,
in Exodus.
twice. In the Torah, it's referred to twice. The 10 Commandments are what? So these are the commandments, 10 in number, thank you, right? Given by whom to whom? God to Moses, to the people of Israel, right? And Moses wrote them down on 2 tablets. You all seen photos, so you know exactly what they look like. No, we don't know what they look like, but it's on 2 tablets, right? The old joke, take 2 tablets and call me in the morning, right? So this is these are the 10 Commandments, the Big Ten. Those of you who are followers of sports, right? So this is the Big Ten, right? Now, of those Big Ten, the Sabbath is number, well, it depends how you count. We'll do the Jewish counting. Number 4. Sorry, that's one of the ways of Jewish counting. There are also Christian countings. It gets messy. But it's number 4. Moses forgot to write numbers when he gave the 10 Commandments. So it resulted as Jews and Christians have been arguing ever since how to count the 10. Look at the notes in the JSB, and it'll explain some of this to you. Anyway, number 4 is observe or remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Okay, and as everybody notes, and you can look in the JSB to explain, right, the 2 versions of the 10 Commandments that we have. One in Exodus chapter 20, the other one in Deuteronomy, where Moses retrospectively retells many of the stories, incidents, and laws that had appeared earlier in the Torah. Moses, unfortunately, does not use exactly the same language. And the divergence is greatest in the Sabbath. In the book of Exodus, we are to remember the Sabbath day because we were once slaves in Egypt and God, no, sorry, other way around. Right, we were once, God created the world in 6 days and therefore we are to rest. We're echoing back Genesis 1, whereas in Deuteronomy, all of a sudden something to do with slavery. Why these 2 differ is an interesting question. On the handout, I write that little brief note. It's perhaps the problem is universality versus Israelite specific, whatever. You can look at the passage. Anyway, it's right there in the 10 Commandments. It's a big one. Is circumcision mentioned in the 10 Commandments, class?
No.
Are the food laws mentioned in the 10 Commandments?
No.
No. Okay. Sabbath, like Israel, like God, is holy. I mentioned that already, right? The concept of holiness applies to time as well as places, as well as objects, as well as persons. So the Sabbath is holy. Another way by which the Israelites are showing you how special the Sabbath is. Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between Israel and God. The Sabbath is a covenant. This is the same kind of language we saw in connection with circumcision, referred to the Sabbath here too. So, put it all together. The legacy, the biblical legacy about the Sabbath is richer than about food laws or circumcision. And it seems to indicate that the Israelites themselves attributed much significance to it. not just one chapter somewhere, but there's a very rich biblical legacy on the subject, from which we deduced the Israelites themselves attributed much significance to it and saw the Sabbath as not just a day off, but saw the Sabbath as a special day in the relationship between God and Israel. Okay, questions, observations? Now, as we'll see today, as you saw in your reading, as we'll see on Monday, when we talk about the Sabbath, we have two different things we're talking about. One, it's a day off, a rest from work. So one thing we need to talk about is, what does it mean when we say you don't do work on a Sabbath day? That we might call the negative side, the prohibition. Don't. Then we have a positive side. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, how do you do that? What do you do? The day then is a spiritual day. The day has some kind of connection between God and us in some way. We'll see in the Christian material these two different sides of the Sabbath, which become Sunday, and we'll see now also two different sides of that on the Jewish side. So I'm going to start with the prohibition side, the don't side. Don't is the Sabbath, right? The prohibitions. Do not do any manner of work on the Sabbath day. Lo taseh kol malacha is what it says in Exodus 20, echoed in Deuteronomy. What does this mean? Now, just imagine that you are an Israelite in the wilderness. Moses has come down, aka Charlton Heston has come down from Mount Sinai with 2 tablets, and he proclaims them out loud, and Moses says in his thunderous voice, "Don't do work on the Sabbath day." Did you see the movie that came out? It's kind of cheeky, you know, it's kind of funny in retrospect. Special effects in the 1950s just aren't quite what they have become in the movies. Nonetheless, it's a blast, it's a hoot, you should watch it. So anyway, so the thundering voice, "Don't do any work on the seventh day, So I can just imagine some Israelites, some smart ass in the back saying, Moses, I don't understand what that means, don't do any amount of work on the seventh day. It means I shouldn't go to work, I shouldn't get paid, but I could go to the mall and go shopping, right? That's not a problem, right? And that's not work, is it? And you know, I like to work out. I got my home gym. I could sit there all day and work up a sweat, but that's not really work, is it? Then someone else would say, yeah, I can take my kids to the beach, right? That's not a problem. That's not work, is it? You understand the questions will multiply very rapidly. What does it mean, thou shalt not do any manner of work? One does not need to be a Pharisee or a Jesuit or a closed-minded reader of the text to understand immediately, this is vague. My idea of work and your idea of work might not be the same. So it's interesting to pursue this point, to understand this as a specimen not just of biblical exegesis, or interpretation, remember, exegesis, fancy word, interpretation, right? But also as an example of how the Sabbath itself grows. As we look through the text over time, we can see more and more things gets prohibited. There's greater and greater specificity as we move forward in time, as the Israelite culture and society is less and less comfortable with this rather vague general prohibition, and we're looking for specifics. So we look in the Bible itself. What does the Bible itself tell us before we look at post-biblical material? So in the Bible itself, we have various passages. Exodus 35, not to kindle a fire. Lo teva'aru eish b'chol moshrotechem b'yom haShabbat. You may not kindle a fire. Though later Jews argue whether that means you shall not kindle a fire or you may not let a fire remain lit.
May not use a Kindle.
That's what it is, right. Don't use a Kindle on the Sabbath. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's very good. Right. iPads are okay. Well, okay, that's not true. iPads are not okay. But yeah, okay. Well, let's not. Anyway, where was I? Yes. So later Jews will argue whether it means you may not kindle a fire, i.e. strike a match and light a fire, but if you have a fire already lit from before, it's perfectly okay to leave to take advantage of a already lit flame. Okay, that's a good example of close reading will provide different modes of reading. Okay, but our friends, the rabbis, the sages, they thought it meant do not light a fire. That's how they understood the prohibition of Exodus 35. Then we have the story of the wood chopper, which is alluded to by Goldenberg in your reading. right? We're not quite sure what the prohibition is, but whoever it was who did it did something bad. He went out and was mikoshesh etzim b'yom HaShabbat. What does that mean? He was chopping wood, gathering wood. We're not sure what it means. Whatever it was, he lost his head over it because he was executed for violating the Sabbath. So if I knew exactly what that meant, I would know something else about what's prohibited on the Sabbath according to the Bible. Then we have Exodus 16, the manna. Remember the chapter of the manna I asked you to read a few weeks ago? Yeah, just humor me. Must be nice, right? You know, I'm a cold and I'm feeling 100%. Just say yes. Right, you all remember the passage in the manna, Exodus 16, that we read a few weeks ago, as an example of Jewish and Christian Bible exegesis. Well, I mentioned then, preparing you for this moment, that interwoven into that chapter about the manna from heaven is stuff about the Sabbath. Right? And surely the narrator has stuff in the Sabbath there because he, the narrator, thinks this is the source for Sabbath laws that later Israelites will want to observe. Something about you don't go outside the camp on the Sabbath, you prepare your food ahead of time on the Sabbath. That's why does the manna fall on the Sabbath, class? No. So how do you eat on the Sabbath if you're relying on the manna and the manna doesn't fall on the Sabbath? What do? You have double on Friday. Right, so God is telling us that we need to prepare our food for the Sabbath on Friday, because on Sabbath we may not cook anything. We need to prepare our Sabbath food on Friday. This is what later Jews understood, right, from this chapter. And one could argue, I think reasonably, that the narrator meant this to be understood in this way. This is meant to explain to you the origin of various Sabbath laws and prohibitions. Exodus 16. The fullest, most detailed chapter is from Jeremiah 17. Remember, who's Jeremiah again? Remind me somebody? Jeremiah? One of the prophets, right? One of the prophets, right? He's not, so the two golden ages of prophecy, 8th century BCE, Isaiah, Jerusalem is the big one, Hosea, Amos, 8th century BC, and then 6th century. If you want 700 over here, 600 over here. That's Jeremiah is in the latter group. Jeremiah, Ezekiel are the two big prophets from around the year of 600, give or take. Okay, Jeremiah 17. Here we have a very interesting paragraph. Should I read it? Nah, I'm not going to read it. You can read it yourselves. Anyway, interesting paragraph which Jeremiah is waxing eloquent about what is prohibited on the Sabbath. And we have here some very pregnant sentences that will launch whole tractates in the Talmud later on as they try to decipher what exactly Jeremiah meant. But here I see the growth of Sabbath prohibitions. There's something here about, hear the word of the Lord. This says, where are you? Verse 21, do not bear a burden on the Sabbath day, or bring it by the gates of Jerusalem. Do not bear a burden out of your houses or do any work. Keep the Sabbath day holy. So here's something about carrying a burden. Not to carry a burden out of your house, not to carry a burden through the gates of Jerusalem. From these verses, later Jews will deduce the prohibition that we may not take a burden, which is understood to mean anything, right, out of the house into the public sphere, into the public way. We're not to go out through the gates of Jerusalem outside the settlement. Right? Later Jews will develop a whole series of very complex rules governing what we may carry on the Sabbath. We may wear clothes, for example, on the Sabbath. Pious Jews don't walk around naked on the Sabbath. You're allowed to wear clothes that's not considered to be transporting, but you may not have something in your pocket. Because that's transporting, that's carrying. You may not walk around carrying something in your hand, but if it's an item of clothing, of course you may wear it. I'm just starting with the rules, trust me on this. The rules get very complicated. And then the rabbis come up with this ingenious device to circumvent the prohibition, called an eruv. Goldenberg mentions that. Forget that. Too much information. TMI. Okay, so this comes out of Jeremiah and a parallel passage in Nehemiah, where we see in these texts, which come after the Torah, the prohibitions are expanding. Moses in the Torah never said, don't transport on the Sabbath, don't carry a burden on the Sabbath, don't carry a burden out of your house on the Sabbath, don't carry a burden through the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Moses never said those things. That's not in the Torah. But here these prohibitions are growing, multiplying. And they will continue to do so over the course of time as Jews try harder and harder to understand What does it mean? What does it mean when it says, do not do any manner of work on the seventh day? Questions on that? Isaiah 58:13, a very important verse for the development of the Sabbath. This is from Isaiah. Modern scholars will tell you this is not by the real Isaiah of Jerusalem in the 8th century BCE. It's by a later anonymous prophet who we simply agree to call Isaiah because we have no other name for him, who's alive in the 6th century BCE. For my purposes here, it doesn't matter in the slightest. Isaiah 58:13. If on account of the Sabbath you turn back your foot from doing your own desires on my holy day. What does that mean? I'm not sure. Ancient readers weren't sure either what this means, if you turn back your foot. They thought it meant if you don't go on a journey, you stay home. They might be right. I have nothing better to suggest. It's an odd phrase. Not clear at all what Isaiah means. If on account of the Sabbath you turn back your foot from doing your own desires on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor by not going your own ways, finding your own interests, or speaking words, then, he says, there are some boons and rewards waiting for you. Later Jews will argue exactly what these phrases mean. Not at all clear what these things mean. What does it mean for speaking words? Apparently there's a prohibition of a certain kind of speech on the Sabbath. Later rabbinic Jews thought it meant you shouldn't talk business on the Sabbath. Other things, of course, you can talk about on the Sabbath. There's no requirement to be quiet, to be silent, but there's a notion of appropriate speech. Right. If that's what the prophet meant, I don't know, but that's what the prophet was understood to mean. The most interesting line here, though, is if you call the Sabbath a delight. This is discussed by Goldenberg. The idea we have a tension in the Sabbath laws between the Sabbath is a day of prohibition, don't. Be careful lest you do something to violate the Sabbath, which seems to be entirely negative. It seems to be, to be very blunt, oppressive, restrictive. But there's the other side to the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day of delight. So I'm going to jump to the last paragraph here in the notes, and then I'll loop back. What does it mean that the Sabbath is a delight? Again, what Isaiah meant, I don't know. But I know what happens to this idea in Judaism, from antiquity down to modern times. The Sabbath, on one hand, is a day of restrictions and prohibitions. On the other hand, it is a day of delight. How is the Sabbath day a day of delight? It's a delay of delight in two senses in classical Judaism, from ancient through modern contemporary times. It's a delay of delight in a spiritual sense. Right? You remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. How do we do that? We spend time in synagogue on the Sabbath. We study the scriptures on the Sabbath. We meditate on the scriptures on the Sabbath. And this idea is already ancient. This is mentioned by Philo and Josephus in the 1st century of our era. And this, for the rabbis at least, is one side of the delight aspect of the Sabbath. Because what is a greater delight than to take a day off from work and sit and study Torah? That's the spiritual side of the delight. There is also, to be very blunt, a carnal side. What does that mean? If I have a nice outfit I'm going to wear, I'm going to save it for the Sabbath. Pardon the expression, like Sunday best. We used to have such an idea in English. A Sunday best. Well, the Sunday best idea comes from a Saturday best idea. You have a nice pair of clothes, you wear it on the Sabbath. You have a nice meal lined up, you save it for the Sabbath. You want good food on the Sabbath. You want to eat well and eat a lot on the Sabbath. Right? You're feeding the body. It's a day of delight for the body. And last but not least, it's the right day of the week for husband and wife to have sex. Of course, they can have sex whenever they feel like it, right? Given things about menstrual purity and such things. But in principle, husband and wife. But, however, people are busy, people are tired. When's the right day of the week? Answer, it's the Sabbath. Now, of course, there always are these fuddy-duddies around, right, who see people having fun and they immediately object or they immediately find reason to find fault. So we have such people too, and there are those already known from antiquity already, for whom the day of the Sabbath is a day of prohibition, right, overwhelms the idea, the concept of the Sabbath as a delight, or they don't have this idea of the Sabbath as a delight. For them, it's just a day of prohibitions. So we know about some Jews in antiquity who are fasting on the Sabbath. 1 second. Are fasting on the Sabbath. They say the Sabbath is the day you don't eat at all. It's a weekly fast day. And similarly, in the Middle Ages, there will be Jews who will say, right, you may not have sex on the Sabbath. It's inappropriate to have sex on the Sabbath. Learned footnote. What would be the legal basis of prohibiting sex on the Sabbath? Answer, the prohibition of plowing. Okay, but back to where I was. So you have then a prohibition. There are those out there who see the restrictive side of the Sabbath as overwhelming the other aspect. But Rabbinic Judaism, classical Rabbinic Judaism, from ancient through modern times, sees a balance. It is both restrictive, prohibited, long list of prohibitions. At the same time, there is, from Isaiah 58, the idea that the Sabbath is a day of delight, spiritual delight, carnal delight, and that is fine. That is part and parcel of what makes the Sabbath the Sabbath. Okay, you had a question.
Yes. So, for the Jews who believe that you should, have your best meal on the Sabbath, how would they have the best meal? I'm assuming would it be cold then, since you can't light a fire?
Yes, exactly. So, right. So Friday night, anybody can have a hot meal on the Sabbath because you remember what I said earlier. You can light the fire in advance, get your oven hot, and even after you don't feed it anymore, it will remain hot for some time. So anybody can have a hot meal on a Friday night. That does not require any great leaps of imagination. Shabbat during the day, however, it gets harder, right? How do you get a warm meal if you can't light a fire? Can't light a fire. Well, not to worry. Ancient to medieval Jews figured out ways that you develop a kind of thick stew kind of thing, which is hot on Friday evening, and you pack it up in just such a way so that when you're ready to eat it on Saturday midday, it is still hot, or at least warm, still warm. But you're right, that is a problem. And if you are a critic of the Sabbath, you will make fun of the fact that the Jews are eating cold food on the Sabbath. That's mentioned by Martial, a Roman poet in the 1st century, and our friend Justin already makes fun of the fact that the Jews are eating lukewarm food on the Sabbath. That's another way of saying it. But you're right, that is a challenge. But the idea is you want to have your gourmet food and somehow it's still warm and somehow you haven't lit the fire at the same time. Yeah, it's a challenge. Modern Jews get around this by having timers on their ovens. On the theory, if you set your timer before the Sabbath starts, then it's not your fault the oven goes on at 10:30. And your food is nice and warm by 12. But the rules are very complicated, but that's in a nutshell. Consult your local rabbi if you want to know all the rules. Okay, other questions? Okay, the most amazing, oh, I'm going fast today. Okay, the most amazing development in the history of the Sabbath prohibition side, the negative side, the prohibited side, is the list of 39 labors. Which is the next sheet. Is that up there? Okay. That's 39 labors that appears in the Mishnah. Okay, does somebody remind me, what is the Mishnah? Okay, what is the Mishnah? Don't confuse it with Midrash, remember? Right, what is the Mishnah, Anna?
Oral Torah.
Mishnah is oral Torah. I wish you had not said that, because that would require me to give an hour-long lecture to explain why it's not the oral Torah. Okay, I'll accept it for an opening bid. But let's get more specific. What is the Mishnah? Answer. The Mishnah is, finish the sentence. Yeah, Harry?
A text codified in like 200 CE, which was written down. I kind of was going to say something like what Anna said, in that it was writing down parts of the oral Torah. That is.
All right, how much time do I have here? Let's see. No, I got plenty of time. I'm going fast today because my throat hurts. Okay, then, all right, let's get to the key points. The Mishnah is a book. Okay? The oral Torah is an idea, a concept, a theory. So let's start with the first point. The Mishnah is a book. At some point, the book is written down. We're not sure whether it was meant originally as an oral book, kind of like Homer, where the poems are memorized and sung for a long time by memory, and only gradually does it get written down. So sort of like that, or when the Mishnah began its life as a written book. Okay, we're not sure. But it's a book. It's a relatively fixed collection of texts. It's a big book. Okay, the subject of this big book, this Mishnah book, which, as Harry correctly said, emerges in the 2nd century of our era. At the same time, Justin Martyr is busy talking away over here, 160 or so CE. The sages of the land of Israel are busy writing and producing what will become the Mishnah book. Okay, it's a book full of laws, full of legal discussions, legal points. 63 tractates in the Mishnah, as they're called. 62 out of the 63 are discussions of legal material. Legal material, rituals, customs, practices, things you should do, things you should not do, things you must not do, and if you do, then what the punishment might be, right? A whole series of such things. How the priests in the temple go about their rituals. There is no temple anymore, you object, in the 2nd century about CE. Yeah, exactly. Mishnah is a very odd book. It talks about a lot of time about things which are no longer practicable. It imagines there's still a temple and there are priests who are still sitting there, and there are and the purity laws and all those things. Mishnah is obsessed with those things. Okay, it's an odd book. So it's a book of legal materials. Right? Rulings, discussions, debates about points of ritual practice, custom, normative law, written in Hebrew by our friends, the rabbis or the sages in the land of Israel. Now, okay, shy of 2 points, 2 minutes. Right, so, where does the Mishnah come from? How does the Mishnah know this stuff? How does the Mishnah know 1,000 pages worth of material? That's how long it is in English translation, 1,000 pages. How does the Mishnah fill up 1,000 pages full of material about ritual, custom, law, practice? How does it know all this stuff? And one of the most amazing things about the Mishnah is it doesn't tell us. It just gives laws, rituals, debates. They just spout, just talk one after another. It comes at you in profusion. You're buried in this massive material. It doesn't tell you where it comes from. Later sages who read the Mishnah, studied the Mishnah, were very bothered by this. And their answer is, I know where the Mishnah comes from. The Mishnah is the oral Torah. Charlton Heston came down from Mount Sinai, and he had on his manly shoulders the 2 tablets of the law, so-called the 10 Commandments. That's just one shoulder. On his other manly shoulder, Charlton Heston brought down the oral Torah, in which Moses would explain what the Torah means. Moses would expand upon the written Torah, which is just the smaller part of the Torah. The bigger part of the Torah is the oral part, the part that God never wrote down, the part that Moses taught to his disciples, and their disciples to their disciples, and their disciples down to us. And the Mishnah is the repository of that. That's a theory about the Mishnah. The Mishnah itself never propounds about itself, except in a few very discrete passages. You have to wait to the next layer in tradition, with which the later rabbis and sages who study the Mishnah don't like the fact that the Mishnah is a cannon rolling free on the deck of Judaism. We can regularize it. We can get it under control if we say, oh, it's the oral Torah. They're not making it up. It comes from tradition. Good example. Mishnah Shabbat, chapter 7, Mishnah 2. I'll pick one passage out of, just by complete random. I have 1,000 pages worth. Here's one. The primary labors period on the Sabbath are 40 save 1. Goldenberg gives you a translation of this passage, also a brief discussion of it. The primary labors prohibited on the Sabbath are 40 save 1. Okay, you have 1 through 11, sewing through baking, 2 to 12 through 24, shearing wool, tearing and stowing stitches, hunting deer, building, pulling down, extinguishing, kindling, striking with a hammer, 39, taking out from one domain to another. Okay, Goldenberg gives you a nice discussion of this, arguing that these labors are fundamentally the rabbinic view of civilization. Right, the way these are clustered, what the rabbis are saying, what's prohibited on the Sabbath is human culture. Right, all these things that we humans do to create food, paragraph 1. To make clothing, paragraph 2. Paragraph 3, to prepare parchment and write, paragraph 4. Building and fire. Then we have 39, taking one domain to another. That's always a tricky one. But okay, leave that aside for a second. Here, these paragraphs are the rabbinic concept of what human civilization is about. That's what's prohibited on the Sabbath. Okay, that's very nice. And my friend Bob Goldenberg teaches at SUNY Stony Brook. Nice fellow. Right? I think it's a very lovely essay that he wrote. But the question that bothers me, which doesn't bother Bob, because he's interested in what he wants to do in that essay, right? The interesting question is to observe, how does the Mishnah know this? Let's discuss, what does the Mishnah know? The Mishnah knows that there are primary labors. You see, and then in my translation, which is what this is, I have a note below. Primary labors. These labors are primary in the sense that there are secondary and tertiary labors that unfold under each of them. So the Mishnah has this idea that there are archetypal prohibitions of labor, which in turn encapsulate or include other labors that unfold beneath them. So, classic example. Number 3, reaping or harvesting. So the classic example is you're out there in the wheat field harvesting the wheat. That's what we're talking about. However, by extension, reaping also includes plucking fruit, which in Hebrew has a different verb, different set of verbs. Plucking fruit. Remember that for Monday. We talk about Jesus and his disciples. Plucking fruit or plucking grain. By extension, then too, the next one, standing under a tree and shaking the branches so the fruit will fall off, which is a further extension. Each of these 39 labors then is a master group, a master class of labor, within which certain labors are included, which unfold to include various sub-labors. Do you have that idea anywhere in the Torah class? Did Moses come down from Mount Sinai and tell us there are master groups of labors and subgroups and then subgroups? Did Moses talk that way? No. And if you say, yeah, but who cares? It's just a matter of classifying the stuff. It's all the same. It's all prohibited, right? That's not all the same. That's Mishnah, chapter 7, Mishnah 1 of Mishnah Shabbat, which I didn't give you. Neither did Goldenberg. It matters because if you do an act, a series of acts on the Sabbath by mistake, by accident, and only realize you're, oh my God, it's Saturday today, I forgot. Or, oh my God, in Hebrew school, they never told me you're not allowed to do this on the Sabbath. At that point, we jurists want to sit down and say, what exactly did you do? What are the labors that you performed? And are they in fact a single category of labor, or are they multiple categories of labor? Because if they are a single category of labor, then you're obligated to bring an atonement sacrifice only for that whole category that you've violated. They're not considered to be discrete acts. They're discrete acts only if they belong to different classes. What are the classes? 39 classes. Now that's an extraordinary idea. Where do the rabbis get that? Is that anywhere in the Torah? The answer is no. And then where do they get this crazy idea to have 39 prohibited classes of labor? 39, that's just an odd number. Where does that number come from? that in the Torah? The answer is no. And then you ask, let's look at these 39. Where do these come from? Well, some of them do come from the Torah, like kindling. Right? That was 37. Right? This does come from the Torah, as I mentioned before. But most of these don't come from the Torah. So where does all this stuff come from? This is an excellent example where the rabbis in Rabbinic Judaism, in the Mishnah, have, in fact, let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, have overwhelmed the Torah. The Torah's original writing about what's prohibited on the Sabbath cannot compare with the degree of specificity, the degree of detail, and this overwhelming concern with classification that we see here in the Mishnah. This is an excellent example where how we get from the Torah to the Mishnah is a giant question mark. If you are a pious Jew living today, your answer will be, it comes from tradition. And if you were pious, you then would say the tradition somehow goes back to the oral Torah and Moses at Mount Sinai. If you are a historian, you would say, well, these things grow over time in ways that we can't trace any longer, right? And the rabbis, fundamentally, at some point, you have to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, and say they made it up. That's such an ugly phrase. They created it, right? It's cultural creativity. They are enacting in the Mishnah prohibitions, laws, rituals, etc., which have no basis in the Torah at all, but which come from somewhere else and ultimately become enshrined in the Mishnah and then part and parcel of Judaism. Now this list is fascinating. So now I want to know, where do these things come from and what do they do with them? That's what I do all day when I'm not teaching CB 23, which is the number of this course, CB 23. These are the things that I worry about. This is how I make a living, working on the Mishnah and trying to understand where it comes from. Do you have any questions? We have like about 1 minute left. Do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
So, if you were going to describe the Mishnah in 2 sentences.
Not more, yes?
Like,
what would I say?
Yes.
How would I say? The Mishnah is a rabbinic book from the 2nd century concerned with laws, rituals, customs, and practices, period. That's one sentence. I might then say its most remarkable characteristic are all its legal debates and disputes. I might add that, but I don't have to add that. I would say 2nd century, rabbis, laws, rituals. That's the big stuff. And we have to have the word book in there somewhere. So it's not to be confused with an idea or a concept like the oral Torah. It's a concrete thing. Okay, how's that? Did I get full credit? Okay, everybody. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll...
Okay. Okay, you're with us still, Dave?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Did you hear it okay?
Yeah, pretty good. There's little spots where it echoed a little bit, but it was pretty good.
Okay. So Jackie will probably have this posted later this week so you can see it.
Yeah. Yeah, the window tried to open about quarter after finally.
Oh.
I don't know if you saw something at your end,
No, I didn't see anything pop up.
but it kept popping out. I finally closed it.
Okay. So so I did bring up for background, if anybody wants. So the Luther's understanding, and here's also Luther considered this the 3rd commandment, not the 4th commandment. So that's what Colin was talking about when he said that people count them different. But so in the Small Catechism, it says the 3rd commandment, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. What does this mean? We are to fear and love God so that we do not despise the preaching of God's word, but instead keep that word holy and gladly hear it and learn it. So that was Luther's position on the Sabbath, which is interesting for one thing, because if you look at the Sabbath commandment again, there's nothing in there, for instance, about corporate worship on the Sabbath. It was inferred, it might be a good thing to do, but there's actually nothing specifically in the command about that. And one of the essays that you didn't read for the this section, they even mention, find it here. So in trying to chart the development of the Sabbath worship, we must bear in mind that descriptions of prayer in the synagogue are reserved to the Gospels and the Acts. And descriptions of singing hymns to God belong only in the Sabbath of Philos Therapeuta, which is something else, and the Qumran community, which is that group that they think produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is necessary to conclude that our knowledge of exactly when and where and under whose auspices the gathering on Sabbath took on the role of worship as distinct from study remains opaque. So we don't know. So where we get the idea, and you'll get into this somewhat next week, where we get the idea of having public worship on Sunday is another story in itself. And in fact, I was talking with Mary about this, and so I asked her, because I said, do you think did you ever consider what you did on Sundays as work? And she responded,
No. She doesn't think so.
Did you want to say why, Mary?
Because it was such a delight. It was work.
Okay, all right.
I have reflected on this more in the last few years, but the privilege that I was given to have a pulpit is a marvelous privilege. Would you agree, Helen?
Yes, I would, very much.
Isn't it a delight?
It is. It
Yeah.
truly is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what I did on Sundays included having had to do some work before
Mm-hmm.
because of the preparation of writing a sermon. Sermons were never a delight. It always work.
Yeah, I think you look at it as worship and not work. So, and maybe we say worship is not work, right?
Did everybody hear what David said?
No.
Okay.
Say again.
Oh, go ahead, Mitch.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, David. What David said is that worship by its very nature is not work. When you worship, it is not work. Is that correct, David?
Yeah, basically, that's what I said.
Yeah.
So,
One of the words that people use a lot is the word should. And as soon as you put in a should, you've kind of created work. And I have heard it said that you should go to church on Sundays. When it's a should, then it's not a delight. Then it is work, and it would be inappropriate.
I remember when I was, younger, an adult, but a young adult, and she talked about my going to church because I wasn't going very regularly. And I remember her saying to me, you should go to church on Sunday. It is your duty. That really made it feel heavy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Made it feel very heavy.
Yeah.
And then it's work.
Yeah.
As
like
soon as you put that in, then it is work, and it is not keeping the Sabbath.
Carol, I don't want to pick on you, but I have a good friend who's Catholic and she refers to it as your holy day of obligation.
Yeah.
Oh, there are, we have 6 holy days of obligation, which are not days. But going to church on Sunday was always a serious obligation.
So,
I
so
now
did you,
consider it a privilege.
so it sounded like work to me.
Believe it
And
or not, it wasn't work. It was just the way you were raised. And you got up on a Sunday. Mom got us up at 7. We were at church by 8. It was just a thing to do. And we kept it. We went to church, and the rest of the day, we did not work. There was no work involved on Sunday. As a Roman Catholic, that's the way I was raised.
Yep.
No work.
What is work?
Good question. I didn't consider going to church as work, but then I didn't consider going to school work either. It wasn't until
What
I
about
was
making meals?
out of college and I made a living, that was work. When I
Yeah.
got paid for it, that was work.
When you get paid for it, then it's work, yeah.
Now, Dave just made a good point, and I was going to bring it up because he works, or he did. He was part of the group that volunteered at the meal center.
Mhm.
Now, I think that's where you were going, right, David?
Partly, yeah, that, and even at home, there and at home or wherever you do.
So, but I think when you're making meals for people that are hungry, or say at St. Mark where they do of course you can do some of that ahead of time, so maybe that's not quite as much, but and I know at the meal center, I mean, that's not something you can make ahead of time. So typically the way they do it. So,
Yeah. And you gotta clean up all the dishes and stuff too.
yeah, so is that work?
It's work done out of love.
Say more about that, Carol?
It's an act of charity. It's something you choose to do out of love for God and for the people.
Okay. Did everybody
Well,
understand?
I guess you could say, is it a way of worshiping God by following Jesus?
Aha.
And is worship then not work? So can you start binning things under worship, a form of worship, that such that they're not work? I don't know.
Well, that's a good. Because, you know, I think Luther would agree that that our gift of salvation obligates us to be servants. It's a lot more complicated the way you put it, but leave it at that. And so the feeding that you do, like a better term to work, what you do at the meal center is really an expression of that grace.
Yeah.
Kind of like what Carol said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've been around the church on Sunday and people, looks like work to me, and there's people working pretty hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
It sounded like through this whole process over time with, you know, the Jews that sort of branched off to become Christians, it was kind of a long process where they moved from originally started doing their meetings on the Sabbath on Saturday, but moved to Sunday. But then also a long process where they also stopped following the Torah in detail. You know what I mean?
Well, some of them still do.
Yeah. But you know, we don't observe the Torah at all in a way. I mean, you know, a lot of these other rules in the Torah, we don't follow it as Christians.
Because, for instance, we had a guest lecturer when I was at Geneseo, and he was an observant Jew, so he made sure he came And the lecture was on Saturday, so he made sure he came into town before the Sabbath.
Oh, okay.
So, and then I know Julius, the rabbi in Norwich, I think there are certain things he does before the Sabbath, because once the Sabbath starts, then he's restricted in what he can do.
Yeah. Whereas we have pastors who travel between churches on Sundays or, on our Sabbath.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, but I guess going back, I think Mary had a good answer though about that. If you consider it a delight what you're doing, then
Yes,
it's probably keeping the Sabbath.
yes.
The tricky thing with clergy, though, with pastors, is that they get paid.
Ah, okay.
And we were talking before about it was work once you started getting paid.
Well,
You get paid
Yeah.
for more than what you do on Sunday.
Oh, is it?
yeah. Well, you said the work was writing
No,
the
it's
sermon, and
Sundays.
you know, ideally you
Sunday
did that
is-
on Saturday.
Mhm.
Go ahead,
And then
Anita.
going back to the Jewish religion, their Sabbath starts at sundown on Friday.
Mhm.
That's why most of the Jewish or the Hebrew people live around the synagogues and the temples because they walk. They don't even drive on the Sabbath,
Right.
on the high holidays. So there's a difference between the high holiday, I believe, and just the normal day.
Mm,
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
If they do a lot of walking, they don't drive.
In the town where I used to live, there's still, it's still standing as a little tiny synagogue, and it's managed by the Historical Society of the town. It's in Lisbon. But I remember reading a little booklet about it, and the Jews that were in the area were farmers. And there were some from further in Griswold, they were from Baltic, they were, from all around. And they would drive their cars to a certain point because it was considerable distance. They would drive their cars to a certain point, park them, and then walk the rest of the way to the synagogue on Sabbath. I
There's
remember
several
reading-
there's several in New London that are up by the Ocean Beach area. There's 3 in different neighborhoods,
Mhm.
smaller, temples, so that they
Yeah,
can
well,
walk.
this particular temple probably is about, I'm gonna say maybe 20 by 30 feet big. It's tiny. It's very tiny. But like I said, it's being maintained by the Historical Society.
Now, what if somebody rode in a car but didn't drive? Would that be okay, or does that still
No,
work?
they can't, no, they have to walk. Or they should, that's what they
That's
usually
interesting.
did, was walking.
yeah. That's where the rabbis earn their money, is they figure that stuff out.
Mhm. All I can say, and with my husband's family, they lived like 4 blocks from the synagogue, so they walked. And the meal was prepared the day before Friday, and it was kept in the oven. They had a pilot light on, and the food was kept in there so that you could eat it on Saturday. And the dishes were not clean after eating on Saturday. We rinsed them and set them aside of the sink, but the washing of everything waited until Sunday. And even like the electric light switch, that was taped so that it was put on before their Sabbath, and you did not even touch the electrical. They kept their television on all the time, and if there was a light they needed, that was kept on all the time, but they would not touch anything electrical.
It was considered kindling a fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I know when we were in Israel, we were in a hotel, and there was one elevator that was designated as a Sabbath elevator, so that it stopped at every floor
Uh-huh.
and you didn't have to push the button.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
That's getting detailed.
There's a lot of details. So any other thoughts?
So if you can't hit a light switch, well, what about buttoning up your shirt? Does that work?
I think Cohen said getting dressed is expected, so that,
Mm.
I would think so, but
Yeah.
just curious.
You just have to don't put anything in the pockets.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right, yeah, I heard that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause you're carrying something.
Mm. It's the burden, as he called it.
Now, one of the now he talks about culture or human life. Those were what characterized work. But one of the articles in the book that I gave you the article from, but one of the other articles talks about work was that which, basically on the Sabbath you give up any activity which basically where you're attempting to control nature.
Mm.
That basically you're giving up the pretense that you can be God over nature.
Ah.
Like plowing or carrying or anything. So it's really sort of an act of humility that you're saying that for one day you're giving up control.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So when
What
do
was
they
it?
taking small children to the synagogue on the Sabbath? Like if you had a 2-year-old or 3-year-old who can't walk much, he's carrying them work if you're taking them to the synagogue.
I don't know how that rule came out. I'll try to look that up. I don't know where.
You just think about all these things.
Yeah.
You can see how they get all these.
Well, yeah, it's just like Cohen said. I mean, and as technology developed, it gets more complicated.
Yeah.
Because like I said, the light switch people are talking about that came out of you can't kindle a fire.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So now next week we'll talk. And there will be the discussion about Jesus challenges some of these things, and some of the better known parts of the Gospels are questions he raises about the Sabbath. Although, the question would be, was Jesus observed? Nobody ever questioned that Jesus was not an observant Jew. So he probably kept the Sabbath by and large. But so any other thoughts?
No, it's interesting.
Yeah. So
when you look at it into this detail, you can see too why when Jesus did things like healing people on the Sabbath, it became such a violation to some of them.
Yeah.
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 So,
Okay.
so I'm going to try an experiment here. So, and Dave, you're just going to have to miss out. I'm sorry, but you can hear the noise, but you can still see everything. You can see everything still, Carol, right?
I can, all of you.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to share the screen again. And thanks to modern technology, we can go back to when Moses actually received the 10 Commandments, and you can see how it happened.
Okay. Charlton Heston, yes.
Let's see, share screen.
Your glory and receive your law. What have I?
Cecil B. DeMille.
No. Okay.
You didn't mute us before you tried to share the screen, Mitch.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have any picture.
Oh,
Yes, there's nothing.
oh, sorry. Okay, maybe I will.
I remember that scene though. Ten Commandments.
Okay, well,
Hmm.
you got
Tried.
the- look it up on YouTube. So it's like he said, it's a real hoot. But take it all with a grain of salt. So, okay, so we'll say goodnight for tonight and
Good
we'll
night.
we'll see you next week.
Right ho.
Okay,
Take
good
care. Stay
night.
well. Stay well.
Thanks, Mitch.
Yeah, Dave.
We'll talk to you.
Okay,
Take care, bye.
bye.